The average high school freshman is how old? I didn't go to high school here, so how old is a high school freshman? 14, 15? There you go. That's about right. The average high school freshman probably has many things on his mind, if it's a guy. From video games, to grades, to girls, and so on. Ronan is 10. He's the oldest of all the kids here. Give him a few years and there's going to be girls. And that's going to be a source of headache for the parents. But not many 14-year-olds can claim to run a potential multi-million-dollar company. And I've been reading about this boy for many months now. I've been hearing about his story. And it's very funny that we don't get to hear it a lot over here. Maybe it's because he's from Alabama, but his name is Taylor Rosenthal from Alabama, and he invented something called the RecMed. And he's the child of two EMS parents, I guess, or they're not doctors, but they're not nurses, but it seems like they have something to do with medicine. Anyway, what he has invented is a computerized vending machine that functions similarly to a red box machine. And those of you who know red box, you go to the red box machine and you get a movie, right? But instead of dispensing, and I'm actually reading exactly what he wrote on this article when he was being interviewed. But instead of dispensing DVDs, his vending machine dispenses first aid supplies. So he said, quote, "So we put these at high traffic places that kids could get hurt at, like amusement parks, all kinds of parks, recreational centers, conventions." I kind of redacted his speech because you can tell he's a 14-year-old. He kept saying, "So we put these at any high traffic places that so kids get together, like amusement parks, all kinds of parks, so recreational centers, so conventions, football stadiums, baseball fields, everywhere," he said. What happened is that one day he plays baseball. He was at a baseball game and kids would get hurt. And the moms would not have enough first aid supplies, so they would have to run to the office to get some first aid, and so he thought of an idea. Like, for example, you're at an amusement park like Disneyland, and you get hurt somewhere in the far lands. You know, what are the far lands? You have to run all the way to Main Street to get a Band-Aid or something like that, or maybe you have to walk somewhere else. But anyway, so he said they're going to start putting these vending machines. The first people to do it is going to be Six Flags, the different Six Flags amusement centers all over the country. Recently, he turned down a global company's offer of $30 million to buy his idea. He said, "No, that's too small." He thinks that he wants to know how far it's going to go and everything. Now, why can't we come up with an idea like that? You know, I don't know. We're always on the end where it goes, "That's a good idea." We never want to start it. I'm sure before he got to where he is, Taylor was met with a bunch of cynical adults. Because that's what adults do. As we grow older, we become cynical. Do you guys realize that? Do you experience that? As I get older, I get cynical. I used to have something that go, "Oh yeah, that would work." Now I always take a step back and I go, "I don't know. I'm not sure if that's going to work." As adults, we get more cynical and we lose our childlike faith. And that's what the message for us this morning is going to be. Is it because we're getting older and we're done with Sunday school days? And right now Sunday school is happening in the back. And if you get a chance to watch our YouTube videos on the, do we still put up videos of the kids? Yeah, we still do. And Ryan has been very faithful in putting up videos of the kids. And if you want to see childlike faith, you should see the videos. I watch the videos, and you see the videos of the kids learning in the back, singing, and all that. It is a far different picture of those kids over here to the adults here. Very different from where I'm standing and from where I'm sitting when I'm looking at that video. It's gone are those Sunday school days when we just take everything with faith, no matter how impossible it sounds. Jesus said in Matthew, "Let the children come to me. Don't stop them." Don't stop them. And he said children. He didn't say, let everyone come to me. He was very specific. He said, let the children come to me. Don't stop them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. What is he talking about? Why is it that it will be interesting if Jesus walks into this building, he's probably going to go to the children's room and not to the adults' room? Because the adults, this room is full of cynical adults. But when he goes over there, he's going to see childlike faith. Faith like a child. Jesus was teaching his disciples that it was people who have faith like a child that are going to inherit the kingdom of God. He was very specific about that. And what does that mean exactly? It doesn't mean that only kids can get to heaven. We can all get to heaven, but we need to have that childlike faith. What exactly does that mean? Well, we can see a glimpse of this in our message today, in our story today, if you turn to Mark 9. Chapter 9, verses 14 to 29. It's a little bit long because it's a story, but think of me as a storyteller and read along with me as well. Mark 9, 14 to 29, and this is what it says. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. By the way, can you imagine? They're like listening to the teachers of the law, and when they saw Jesus, they basically left. And they all ran to Jesus. And so the teachers of the law are left without any audience. I thought that was funny. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. O unbelieving generation, Jesus replied, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him, but if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us. If you can, said Jesus, everything is possible for him who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the evil spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciple asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? And he replied, this kind can come out only by prayer. The disciples have lost, if for a short moment, have lost their faith. If you go back a little bit, the story before this, or a few stories before this, the disciples saw Jesus, Elijah, and Moses standing and talking together. What happened to that faith? Remember what Peter said, never mind going down the mountain. Let's just, by the way, if you go to Israel with us, you get to see that mountain. Never mind going down to the mountain. Let's just stay here and we'll build three shacks, 3 cabins, 3 homes for you. Jesus, of course, said that, that's no good. We're not going to do that. But they just saw Elijah, Moses, and Jesus standing there on the mountain talking to each other. What happened that they lost their faith? Or more importantly, what happens to us when we lose that faith? And as I said, even for a short moment, because I'm going to guarantee you that there's going to be adults, so there's going to be people in this place who's going to go, I've never lost my faith. Yes, you have. Yes, you have. We have lost our faith once in a great while. Once in a while. Maybe not for a long time, but we have had moments we have lost our faith. Maybe people lose their faith because their faith is based on a religion, on a set of rules, on something called church, instead of a relationship with the living God. Okay, did you hear that? Our religion or our faith is based on a religion or based on a church instead of a living God. Some of us grew up in homes where our perception of Christianity was a set of rules. Parents, one of the biggest challenges we have with our kids is instilling right and wrong into them without loading them down with rules. Well, at least that's what I'm thinking if I ever had a child. I don't want to load my children with rules, but that's what we want, is that we want to instill right and wrong with them without loading them with rules and squeezing the childlike faith out of them. Look at the religious leaders in the story, the teachers of the law. The leaders were probably telling disciples, you guys have no authority or ability to heal this boy. And so the disciples, in the meantime, were trying to prove to the religious leaders that you're wrong, we can do this. We've seen Jesus do this. The father says with a little exasperation in his voice, I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't, in verse 18. People probably lose their faith also, not because of just the rules, not only because they had, and because they don't really have a relationship with Jesus in the first place, but also because we have experienced failure before. Failure can rob us of our childlike faith. I don't know about you, but if there is a rejection or a failure in my life, it robs me maybe a lot of faith. Sometimes a little faith, maybe sometimes a lot of faith. And the disciples here were trying to be a force for good, and they were trying to bring their relationship with Jesus to bear on something great, the healing of a young man, and the result was complete and utter humiliation on their part. Each blunder that we make on our part, each piece of wrong word we say, each attempt to share our faith, each with family or friends that goes terribly wrong, or we get rejected whenever we share our faith, chips another block. It's like there's this wall that we have built, and we're standing on this wall. But as long as we are always getting humiliated, whenever we get rejected, whenever we get a little bit of failure, that chips on that wall that we're standing on, and we chips another block of our childlike faith. We need to learn that failure always is an event, not a person. Failure is not an event and not a person. God doesn't look down at us expecting to see a string of successes. He doesn't look at vessels of hope and sees a string of successes. That's not what He's expecting. But He looks wanting to see growth in our faith, in what we do, in what we say, and what we believe in. Maybe a third way we can lose our faith is when there's disappointment. Not just failure and rejection, but that there's disappointment. Whenever there's an unanswered prayer, oh my. Whenever there's an unanswered prayer. If you come to Wednesday prayer meetings, you will look at our board. And we list there, obviously, all the prayer requests. And whenever we have a praise, we go, oh, erase this and put it over to the praise. But there are some prayer requests on that board that stays there for months and months and years. And if I'm the board, I'll get disappointed because I still have those prayer requests. You know, how long have we prayed for something? Because every time our answered prayer is here, it steals just a little more of my faith. Each unanswered prayer sucks the life out of us. How long have we prayed to make this church grow? How long have you prayed that the Lord change the person sitting next to you? Don't point fingers, just think of that. And when we plead and work and strain for an answer to some problem and the response is silence, it can sap the faith right out of you. That's how we find this father. I can only imagine being the father at that point in time, the desperation that he may have felt, maybe the humiliation that he was feeling, and all eyes were on him, but also the disappointment that he must have been feeling. Maybe at first he tried going to the religious leaders at the temple only to have them come up empty-handed. Maybe they even blamed him for his son's medical problems and spiritual problems. Word at this time was probably spreading about the disciples and the ministry of Jesus, and he'd already fed the multitude. He performed numerous healings. So he finds the disciples and we go, this time my prayers are going to be answered. This time what I'm asking for is going to be given to me. This time my son is going to be healed. I would imagine that at this point the father is getting excited, one step closer to a cure. But he was disappointed again. So when this dad sees Jesus, he is probably at a low in his faith. At this point, he's a skeptic. At this point, he's very cautious. When Jesus asks him how long this has been going on, you can almost hear the hopelessness in his voice in verse 21. Since he was young, since he was a child. Can you hear the resignation in that father's voice? And Jesus hears it too. He even heard it in the question the father asked next. Because the father says to him in verse 22, the evil spirit often makes him fall into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us. Help us. Do something if you can. That's the word of a skeptic. That's a word of a cautious person who's been beaten up all the time, who hasn't had answers to his prayers. And so what does he say? Do something if you can. If you can. He has gone to Jesus because he is at the end of his rope. And he's tried everything else, but he's been disappointed so many times. So Jesus responds by putting this father back on track to a childlike faith. He doesn't yell at the guy. He doesn't give him a sermon. He doesn't put him outside for timeout. He doesn't do that. Or he doesn't go, well, I'm not going to heal your son because, you're kind of an unbeliever. But what does he do? He responds by putting his father back on track to this faith that he's been talking about. And he said, what do you mean if I can? Anything is possible if a person believes. That's childlike faith. I can go to Sunday school right now and tell the kids that there's a giant sitting outside. And if they want to see it, they should come with me. They're all going to come with me because they believe what I'm saying. They'll believe anything. If I tell you that there's a giant outside, you're not going to come with me. You're going to go, it's hot outside. I'm not going to see that. I'm just going to sit here because I don't believe that. He has gone to Jesus, this father, because he is at the end of his rope. And when Jesus told him anything is possible if a person believes. First, childlike faith believes that God has the power to do anything. Has the power to do anything. A faith that is childlike is a faith that recognizes that accomplishing something impossible is all about not our ability, not the ability of our parents, not the ability of our salaries, but the ability of God and His strength. And His strength. Accomplishing these impossible things is going to be found in the principle on verse 24, when the father instantly replied, I do believe, but help me not to doubt. Or in other words, I like it better when he says, help me in my unbelief. I do believe, but help me in my unbelief. Childlike faith isn't perfect. And that's exactly what the father is saying. Even though I believe, I know I have some unbelief, so help me, God, to do this. Childlike faith isn't perfect faith. There is room for doubt. But the doubt doesn't win. Belief prevails. Did you hear that? Childlike faith has room for doubt, of course. Of course there's room for doubt, but the room is so small. And that room and that doubt doesn't win because belief prevails. God doesn't expect perfection from all of us, but He does expect honesty. We talked about that in Sunday school last week. And transparency. Don't think that you will disappoint God with a prayer that says, God, I know it is impossible to please you without faith. I have faith, but I need you to bolster it. He will answer that kind of prayer, the way He answered the guy's prayer, the father's prayer. The last principle of childlike faith is found in verses 25 to 27. 25 says, when Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, He rebuked the evil spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet, and he stood up. A person with childlike faith watches God does the impossible. Watches God does the impossible. There is one last ingredient, though, that is found in the concluding verses of Mark 9 when the disciples go to Jesus. He goes indoors, and the disciples gather around him, and they say, "Hey," in other words, I'm paraphrasing, "Hey, how'd you do that? How did you do that? And not only that, why couldn't we do that?" Jesus says, prayer is the key. Remain in me, in another verse, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it is severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful apart from me. What does he say? Prayer is the key. You cannot be fruitful severed, apart from me, cut out from me. You cannot be fruitful. I am the vine, he said. You are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Maybe we're expecting God to do great things in our life. But if I'm honest, I'd have to admit that in my order of priorities, God sometimes drops down pretty low on my list. Maybe we don't spend enough time necessary to develop our faith. Before these disciples came down with Jesus, appearing, with Moses and Elijah, as I told you a while ago, this is a huge happening, almost exhilarating thing, the most blessed event that has ever happened to the life of a fisherman who turned to be a disciple. And yet the next thing we know, they are arguing amongst themselves, and the next thing after that, they cannot heal. In our lives, there's a lot of time being spent being in a religion. There's a lot of time spent spent wondering how much we're risking and not getting the results we want. There's a lot of time being spent thinking of disappointments and not enough time believing and ultimately praying to get back the childlike faith, to have the Lord work from within. I mean, I say this, and the first thing that comes to my mind is this church and this building. And we look at our lives here, and the next thing after that, we have a wonderful thing, and then all of a sudden we are faced with something that we're like, can we still stay here? Can we still afford this place? Can we still give enough in order to stay here? Is the Lord still calling us to be here? There's a lot of time being spent thinking of disappointments. There's a lot of time being spent thinking of we should go somewhere else. There's a lot of time being spent, how are we going to do this? We need to give more. There's a lot of time being spent and not enough time risking and putting that in faith to get back the childlike faith, to have the Lord work from within and get rid of the doubts, get rid of the cynicism, get rid of the routines of unbelief that we have. The last thing I'm going to tell you is a scene from Bruce Almighty, and I've probably shared you this illustration before, but I love the way Bruce Almighty was written. And especially one of the things that the best lines that was in that movie when God, being played by Morgan Freeman, was mopping. He was mopping this good old huge room. And after mopping, he said, "There we go. Wonderful thing. No matter how filthy something gets, it can always be cleaned right up." Amen? Amen. Please stand and we're going to pray.